at UT Austin. I'm a human development and family sciences.
Do you have a microphone? I can't hear what
No?
she's
Do you want to come up here and sit closer?
No, that's all
No?
right.
If you talk a wee bit slower.
Slower?
Not louder, just.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to speak a little bit slower. Good. Okay, thank you. So I'm at UT Austin. I study aging. So um, my entire department looks at everyone across the lifespan, from little itty bitty babies to when we put everyone in the ground. And I look at older adults. I think babies are cute, but I don't want to study them. So you are my people. Um, so I have the incredible opportunity to present to you some of the work, some of the studies that I have conducted. And basically, we're going to look at the impact of middle and later life marital disillusions and how those impact your health and well-being. And really quick, a little tidbit or story about me. I served 8 years in the US Army, and then I got out and started going to school. I've been going ever since. I was widowed 11 years ago, so that's why I study marital disillusions. I also have 2 sons, and they're cool. They're cool kids, and I really like dogs. So that's about me. All right, so the 2 types of marital end that we're going to discuss in my studies are divorce and widowhood. There are different types. People get separated, some people stay single, some people stay in committed relationships but don't get married on paper, as we say. But the 2 that I'm going to focus on are widowhood and divorce, because you'll be interested to hear that older adults are getting divorced at much faster rates than other people. I think older adults, you all, have decided if the marriage isn't right, we don't have to stay. And that can feel kind of freeing. So we'll talk about that. So approximately, in general, widowhood is highly concentrated among older adults. I'm kind of preaching to the choir. When I was widowed, it was strange because I was very young, but I was in the Army, so there were lots of other women like myself and men. But about 70% of all the widowhood or experiences of death of one's spouses that occur every year are concentrated among adults age 65 and older. And the majority of those individuals are actually women. And funny enough, the majority in this room are women. So what we know is that over 50% of women age 75 and older are 50% of the people widowed age 75 and older are women. And the reason this is because women live longer, right? So I don't know if y'all remember, but like young men tend to take more risks and they tend to not live as long. They don't go to the doctor as often, they drive faster cars, they climb things, and it puts them at risk sometimes. So that is why women are concentrated when we talk about widowhood. In addition, so gray divorce refers to divorce after the age of 50. So like I said, while divorce is not an ideal situation, it's an off-time experience, and it can be a very painful experience. It is one that older adults are engaging in more and more. So they're actually outpacing the amount of people younger that are getting divorced. And so what that means is that 43%, so almost 50% of all individuals between the ages of 54 and 65 who are getting divorced are like, that's 43 of them are getting divorced who are ever married. So again, you all are saying if the marriage is not quality, we're not going to invest anymore. So marital disillusion is a major life event. And I think that unfortunately for older adults, there is this stigma or this acceptance that the idea that because widowhood or the loss of your spouse is normative, it's a huge part of your story at older ages, that it should be expected, it should be accepted, and we should move forward without trouble. But the truth is that marital dissolution is a really tough experience, whether through divorce, even if you agreed to it, or a widowhood where you didn't agree to it. And one thing that I think is important is why I believe my work is important is because the experience of a divorce or the death of your spouse is universal. All of us will experience this. And so, how do we protect those who are going through that? Because it can be incredibly isolating and difficult. It's associated with loss of resources, loss of friends, and loss of financial, benefits. So the way we look at the life course is through the life course perspective. I did not mean to repeat the word, but I did. So the life course perspective is exactly that. We look at how people develop through life and what environments and what things influence that development. And specifically, the life course is defined as a socially structured events and roles that influence and guide our individual trajectories. So, I was born in the 80s. I love leg warmers, neon green, and what else? Ghostbusters. And I don't know what years you all were born, but you probably have much different ideas of fashion and expectations. I was a really young mom and was not expected to marry my partner. That may have been different 20 or 30 years before. I see you agreeing. So experiences are different. And because of that, my life trajectory has looked different than your all's. And that's how we look at the life course. And so specifically, there are three different principles that I use to guide my research, which is the linked lives principle, transitions principle, and contextual embeddedness. That is a mouthful. I'm gonna need to redo that for my presentation. So, but linked lives. So what that says is that our close relationships ultimately decide how we function in life. They really do influence our development. I imagine that you all remember the relationship you had with your parents, the relationships you had with cousins, brothers, sisters, grandparents. All of those relationships and the quality of those relationships influence how we develop. And in addition, as we get older, intimate relationships, the relationships we have with our partners, our husbands or wives, those are incredibly important, and they ultimately define most adult experiences. And I would argue that the loss of your partner, your intimate partner, is the loss of the most important social connection you have. So again, to reiterate, it's really profound and it should not be ignored and dismissed. So in addition, we talk about transitions. So we all have social roles. So I am also a mom, I am a grad student, I am a wrangler of dogs, I do the laundry, and sometimes I'm a short order cook, depending on my kids, right? So I have all these different roles, and I'm interested, what do you all consider some of your roles? Do you have a significant role that you play in your family? Do you? No?
Getting together a lot.
Yeah. Are you the social person in your family?
Well, we are.
Good,
We love to be together,
good,
and we do it a lot.
good. And what is your role in your family? Anyone else? Yes.
I'm grandma.
Nice, nice. Grandma's a very important role.
I'm
What is your grandma name? Do you have a special?
I have many grandma names, depending upon who's using it.
Got it.
Most of them call me grandma. One family calls me Gigi, or
Okay.
great grandma.
Okay.
And one family calls me Nana. And that is kind of interesting. My mother was Nana, And my son asked me, is it okay if we use your name for the kids as Nana? And I said yes. He said it's almost identical to the Mandarin name for grandmother.
Okay.
And his children are trilingual, Mandarin being one of them.
So yes, grandma names and grandpa names are very important, and that role is incredibly important. And as you all, like, as you've gotten further in your life, before that, your role as husband or wife was critical. It was really important. But when you leave a marriage, whether through divorce or widowhood, that role may be gone, and it changes depending on the type of like experience you've had. If you divorce, you may no longer identify with that. And if you become widowed, you may really want to hold on to that identity. And the transition out of that role can be really tough. And that is one of the life course perspective tenets and principles that guides my research. The last one is context. So some of you may have had experiences, some of you in this room may have been divorced or may have become widowed already. And prior to the death of your spouse, you may have had to caregive. We call that informal caregiving, but it is still incredibly important. And that looks different from someone, like for instance, myself. The death of my husband was unexpected. So the story looks different. But if you leave a marriage through divorce, you may actually be relieved. And I think it's okay to giggle about that. Like, it's okay to say, I left something that wasn't fitting me anymore, right? So those things matter. They decide and they drive the outcomes that people will have after they leave their marriages. So what do we know? We know that people who are not married tend to have and leave their marriage tend to report lower self-rated health. They tend to report lower feelings of satisfaction in life. They tend to have poorer diets compared to their married peers. They tend to report higher levels of drinking alcohol and smoking, which is all very interesting. They also report higher levels of depression and higher levels of anxiety. So at this moment, you may be wondering why I'm telling you the saddest story you've ever heard. But the truth is, it's not. It's not the end of this story. The research is still going, and I intend to keep it going. But the truth is that up until now, the studies have said if you're not married, you're not doing as well. But it's inevitable. Like people will leave their marriages. And how do we help them? And is it always bad? So what don't we know? We don't know what's happening within these groups of people. So comparing a married person to their widowed counterpart is essentially comparing an apple to an orange. And you would not find, like, you wouldn't judge an orange, based on the apple it's sitting next to. That doesn't make sense. What is happening within these groups? So for example, I want to understand, what do widowed and divorced individuals look like before they become divorced or widowed? And what do they look like after? And when I talk about what they look like, I mean their health and their well-being. So do they have more depression? Do they have less depression? How is their physical health? Are they able to leave the house as much? How is their cognition? Do they report higher levels of anxiety, or did they stop eating as well as they used to when they were partnered? But those are the things that we don't know. And we don't know how this is happening specifically at the time of the transition. So comparing someone who's been married for 50 years and someone who's been divorced or widowed for 5, 10 years, again, it's not comparable. It's not telling enough of the story. It's only giving us a snapshot in comparison. And I want to know what is happening at the time of that transition And is there a time that is important to intervene and provide support? So I'll introduce you to my first study, marital transitions and depressive symptoms. So really quick, I apologize, the beginning of this is very sad, but it's really, I promise you, it gets more positive, I promise. So again, based on comparisons to married individuals, divorced and widowed older adults have higher levels of depression, and they tend to last longer. And they can last for up to 10 years. And in addition, what they have found is that when it comes to divorce, women tend to show the highest, exhibit the highest levels of depression after their divorce. But I refuse to take that as the entire story, right? Because usually, or characteristically, we can argue that divorce tends to be defined by, let's say, acrimony. There might be stress if the relationship is ending and people are unhappy with each other. They're probably not being very nice to each other. And when people are stressed, they tend to forget their manners. And so, are you destined to be sad after the end of your marriage, depending on if you get divorced or widowed? So what I wanted to see was at the time of that change, so from being married to being divorced or widowed, what happened with the individual's depression levels. And so I asked a few questions. What is the relationship between widowhood and depressive symptoms? What is the relationship between divorce transitions and depressive symptoms? And lastly, I want to know if this looks different for women and men, because the studies will also show you that men tend to benefit more from marriage. So is the loss of a marriage more difficult on men? So I used a really incredible secondary data set. It's a publicly available data set called the Health and Retirement Study, and it is nationally representative of older adults age 51 and older in the US. And it does a really great job of collecting data every 2 years. And some of you may actually have filled out interviews or be a part of these studies, but it is a really incredible data set that tells the story of older adults, the stories that we should not forget. And it allows us as researchers to examine the opportunities and the challenges that older adults face. So for the sample, I looked at 20 years of data from 1998 to 2018, and I got a sample over 22,000 people. So a really good sample. Lots of people told us what they're doing in their lives over many, many years. And how it worked is you had to be over the age of 51, and you had to be married at some point in the study. So if someone remained single or divorced or widowed all 20 years, they were not part of this study. So I hope that makes sense that everybody was married at the beginning. Approximately 4% of the sample became divorced, and approximately 17% became widowed over those 20 years. And that's following in line with the statistics, which indicates that older adults are becoming widowed more often than divorcing, but they are still divorcing. So I looked at the transition like I told you. So someone would report being married, and then they would report if they stayed married or if they became divorced or widowed. And that's when I would then program my analysis to look at what was happening with their depression levels. And the way we measure depression is by looking at what we call the CESD-8. That is not important, but it asks questions. Do you feel sad today? Do you have trouble getting out of bed? Do you feel happy? One question is, do you feel depressed? So there's that, but that is the questions that they ask. And the way it works is you have what they call negative questions and positive questions, and they add those up. And the positives obviously take away from the negative questions. So hopefully this is, oh, okay, doing good. All right, so what we found is that ultimately people who became divorced did not experience lower or higher levels of depression. Their depression actually got lower. So if you look um, right here for men, oh, I apologize, this is for divorce. Hold on, let me read this. Um, their depression got higher. If you can see this dark red right here is the transition itself from being married, and their depression did get higher for both men and women, okay? So there is something happening. However, if you look, for women it gets really high and then it drops back down within 2 years. So women are adapting, their depressive symptoms are coming down very quickly after their divorce. However, men are experiencing heightened levels of depression for a lot longer. It takes a longer time for them to adapt. Now, for widowhood, it is very clear that after becoming widowed, you experience a very high increase in your depressive symptoms. But if you look, over time, it decreases. And for women who remain widowed over 6 years actually have lower depressive symptoms compared to their married peers. So they are getting better. It takes time and it's intense at the beginning, but it gets better, which I think can be a really useful story. So like I said, I won't read this because this has to do with significance, and I don't think it's important here. But ultimately, could leaving a marriage be beneficial through divorce? And I will be the one to say that I think that there could be benefits of leaving a bad marriage. Did you say yes? There could be arguments for that. And the way my analysis showed up is that technically, while we saw changes in depression, they weren't what we called significant. So technically, they're not associated. So the argument could be that leaving a marriage out of divorce could be good for you, or you could just simply be okay. It does not have to tell the rest of your story. And in fact, it could tell a new story, a beginning of a new story. So let me tell you about my second study. And hopefully this one is a little more exciting. This one is my most exciting, but marital transitions and cognitive function. So I wanted to look at the same situation, older adults who were leaving their marriages through widowhood or divorce, but what was happening to their cognition. And when I talk about cognition, I'm talking about executive function and memory. I know that there is a poor notion that as you age, you suddenly forget everything, you don't have autonomy, and that if your cognition declines, you cannot be on your own. But that's not the story I'm gonna tell. So, historically, as we age, our cognitive function does change. It does decline, but in a very, very small and measurable way. So please don't leave my presentation thinking that after you turn 65, you just turn it off. That's not how that works whatsoever. You all are still very aware and your cognitive function is still very intact, but there is change that occurs. So we have to acknowledge that. However, another unfortunate story is that currently the research will tell us that if you become widowed or you become divorced in later life, it impacts your cognition. It actually has a negative impact. Individuals who became divorced or widowed showed higher risk of cognitive impairment. So that meant lower memory function, lower ability to identify their everyday things, and it's a really unfortunate story, right? It says that if you're not married, you're not okay. But like I said, divorce and widowhood are very normative or part of our stories. Widowhood can be experienced for many older adults, and so to simply say that you're at a disadvantage is not fair. So again, what I wanted to see was how older adults who become widowed or become divorced, how their cognitive function changes. And I wanted to see from when they were married to when they became divorced or widowed. And that's within 2 years. So it's likely that if they were divorcing, they were probably experiencing some strain, right? So their marriage was probably already ending or getting close to ending. And so there were probably some stressors and some changes occurring. In addition, if they became widowed, it is very likely that they were possibly caregiving for their partner, or there were signs that the partner was getting closer to death. So I asked 4 questions in this study because not only did I want to see how widowhood and divorce were associated with cognitive function, I wanted to see if it was different for men and women, and if it was different depending on the timing. And so we tend to define middle life between 50 and 65, and then older adults from 65 on. And what I wanted to see is if there was a difference based on those, what would you call, cutoff points. And again, I used the health and retirement study. I don't know if it's possible to be a fan of a study, but I am a fan. I think it's a great study, and I think that it has basically changed our ability to do research, which I think is really great, and it's free. I haven't had to pay for it, which really matters when you're a grad student. So again, I had 23,000 participants, so a really large group of people that were able to stay into the study sample. And I dropped anyone from the sample, and I didn't physically drop them. They just simply were not a number in the calculation. If they became married again after being widowed or divorced, because remarriage is also part of marital history, right? But I don't look at remarriage. So if you got remarried during the study, we took you out of the sample. But ultimately it was another 20 years, so the same time frame, 1998 to 2018. And so I looked at cognitive function. We measure this, just certain things. I don't know, you know, occasionally we get asked these tests like by the doctor, but they'll ask you to repeat several words back to them, and then they'll delay that, or they'll do it immediately, or they'll ask you to do what we call the serial sevens, which I would fail, which is you have to count backwards from 7. So my cognitive function would be low because I don't even know how to do that. It sounds really hard and I panicked. So, but then again, I also looked at, again, like I said, the transition. So from when you're married to when you reported being divorced or widowed. So what we found is that divorcing someone did not result in any changes associated with your cognitive function. So again, I think what we're seeing is that divorce is affecting lots of aspects of your life, but it is not putting older adults or middle-aged adults at risk for cognitive impairment, which I think is really important. And I think it's fair to say that there can be some fear among older adults that if they show cognitive impairment, they are at risk of losing their independence, right? The assumption is that if you are forgetful, that you may not be able to live on your own, but that's not always the case. So what we're seeing is that divorce does not change your cognitive function. However, we did see some really interesting things among women who became widowed. So under the age of 65, between ages 51 and 65, if you became widowed, your cognitive function did decline. But most interesting is that women over the age of 65 who became widowed experienced a jump in their cognitive function. I'm so glad you all got that. But their cognitive function got better. And I am so excited to look at this because what is happening? And so I have some thoughts, but I think you all might have more thoughts, which I look forward to hearing about. So here is the graphs that I showed you, and you can see it very clearly that this is not the right one. This is labeled incorrectly, but oh no, it's correct. That your cognitive function, this one on the right, your cognitive function got better if you were over the age of 65 when you became widowed. Something really significant is happening. And I'm really excited to look into it, and hopefully I'll share those findings with you, but this is as far as we got. So, do marital disillusions in middle and later life really impact your cognitive function? And arguably, divorce does not. It seems like older adults and middle-aged adults who leave their marriages through divorce are doing fine. Their cognitive function is not negatively or even positively impacted. And this is different from what other people are saying. The other research before me has always looked at it comparatively to married individuals, and like I said, that's an apples to orange equivalent. It's not fair, right? Because marriages that continue look very different from people who are becoming divorced, and from relationships that are ending in divorce or relationships ending in widowhood. And so what I think is really important and a huge takeaway from this study is that the timing matters. And while we can't control timing, obviously we cannot control when our partner dies, we can be aware of that as researchers to work on the interventions that may support these individuals. So I'm not gonna, okay. So here's some of my thoughts, and you might giggle, or you might say yes, or you might say those are absurd. I think what might be happening is that older women who become widowed have probably likely been expecting the death. I think that they probably were caregiving for their ill partner. And because we know that women tend to outlive men, and the study, the results show that it's women that are experiencing this increase, I think that they are preparing. So they have what we call anticipatory grief. They are preparing. And then second, if anyone has had to plan for a funeral or the process of laying your loved one to rest, it requires a lot of engagement, mental engagement, and it requires you to remember a lot. Recently, we lost a loved one in my family, and the list of things to do were very, very long. There were multiple lists, multiple checking twice, and it's intense. And so, even though you are grieving, if you are engaging in those processes, they're likely promoting cognitive function. That's what I think might be happening. And by no means do we not miss our loved ones when they die, but I think what might also be happening is a relief from the role of caregiving. Caregiving is hard. Um, if anyone has children, I mean, like, keeping my children alive when they were tiny was it was hard because they're constantly getting into things. But caregiving for your loved one, your husband, when you are older is very different, but it is still very taxing and can be really exhausting. And there might be a relief from that. It's not that we aren't sad, but that we are saying they're resting, and we did our job. Okay, so, okay, I talked a lot faster than I was supposed to, but took me exactly 37 minutes. I apologize. But I just want to acknowledge my advisor is Dr. Se-Wong Han, and that poor man has had to put up with me for the last 3 years. We have 2 more years to go. So, I also come out of the aging lab at the UT department, and I'm really grateful to them, and to my family, and to my dogs. These are my guys. They are precious, and they've spent a lot of late nights with me. But I want to genuinely say thank you to you all, because being here is always a gift. And the fact that you all support me and welcome me and come here and listen to me ramble. It means so much to me. But that is my presentation. So thank you. I can move forward if that helps with sound. Are there any questions? Or feedback? Yes.
Did you remarry?
I did remarry, yes, yes, and I came with 2 kids, so yeah, yeah, woo. No, we're very fortunate, but yes. Anyone else? And I will definitely answer questions about myself. I don't think I'm self-centered, but I'll answer them. Any feedback? Yes.
I'm wondering whether the increase in cognitive function that you're seeing in the older widows might be related to the realization that suddenly they have to make all the decisions. They're losing their sounding board.
You have a really great point, and that is such a great input, because I wonder, and this would be great if y'all could provide your input. Would you all argue that your relationships with your husbands and wives had roles, like one person did the budget, one person did the laundry, or the child, like they were the person that got called when the child was sick, or they were the ones who fixed the hole in the wall, those types of things? Okay, so you all feel like that. I think that's a really great point, and I need to think about that. Because relationships now, marriages look different. People share the duties a little bit more, or we're getting there. We're getting there.
Back there, the mothers did everything, the fathers just worked and brought in the paycheck.
I like it. That's not, yeah. So relationships nowadays look very different. Very different. So, like I am in a PhD program and I'm gone a lot, and my husband, who is the stepfather to my children, he picks them up. He gets called when they're sick, and it's very different. He does work too. Yes.
My father didn't know how to use the washing machine. And my mother as my husband was doing his own washing.
Oh, wow.
So that's a big difference.
Yeah, that is, yeah. Yes.
In your previous talk, you, see if I recall this correctly, you made some statements about that if you do go through a divorce or a life transition, difference between, let's say, being at home alone after that versus doing some other things that seem to help out their faith, being in community. There were like 4 different things that you mentioned.
Yes.
Like that help, and I wonder if those would help with have an impact on the cognition as well,
Yeah. I think the reason older women, or women who are younger than 65, what I surmise might be happening is that the reason they might see that drop in cognition is because they may not have the same experiences. They're more likely to be working, or their partner is, and so they're losing income, which can be incredibly stressful. They also may not have the same community, and so like I said, most of the people who become divorced or become widowed every year are over the age of 65, and so it can arguably be something seen as off timing, and if you just don't have that group. Because I know for this is the way I can experience this. When I was widowed, I had other widows that were young and looked like me, but if you don't have that, it can be really straining on your well-being. So, but yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Any feedback on the slides? How did those look?
Great.
did you? Okay, good.
Much improved.
I'm here for it. Yes. Anything else, or any questions, or things I should think about? Yeah.
Might be interesting to have, as a part of this, is different groups that you can join. Because there might be people who have gone through this and that.
Oh yeah, I think that is important to provide resources because it is a heavy topic, but I got into it because I didn't want the only story of people who are experiencing marital transition to be so dismal and sad. And the loss of our loved one is huge, whether it's through divorce or widowhood, but I genuinely believe that life is really beautiful, but I think that it's important to, yeah. So I will definitely list some resources because I just think community does make a huge difference. It's so critical. It sounds like all of you agree, so yeah. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all. I hope you'll have me back and I can show you more cool results or something. Thank you.
Gladly. Thank you.